G'day and welcome to the very first edition of PlaybyPod, a fresh new podcast that explores the art of sports broadcasting across a range of sports across the country, from TV, radio and streaming platforms. My name's Chris Yeend, and I'm joined for the very first edition by the great man, Daniel Viles. Thanks for being a part of an historic broadcast here on PlaybyPod.
I wouldn't have the courage to say no, Chris. Wonderful concept. Looking forward to seeing if we can make this fly.
Absolutely. And the irony of, well, I guess you could say irony of the initials of PlaybyPod, we think of play by play, so P by P. I think it has a bit of a ring to it. So I guess you and I across 2023, we've spent a lot of time talking about commentary, and a lot of key points that have been raised throughout our commentary circles is there's just not enough content out there that talks about the art of broadcasting and basically education points of view to sort of get that across. There's just not much material out there across Australia.
Professional commentators want to keep their cards close to their chest. They most of them give you the same bits of feedback, and they're all out there. And yes, the only way to get better at commentary is to practice it. But yeah, I think there's been a real reluctance for anyone to actually tell you how they do it, certainly not in a public forum.
Precisely. So the aim of this podcast, to go with the many podcasts on options across Australia that are available, is we want to bring people in, learn about their history with commentary, what they love about it, what got them into it, talk about some key points, and also discuss probably a moment with every episode on a piece of commentary that we like. And so we've got a nice juicy one to start up with. So that's what it's all about. So we'll see how we go there. But mate, tell us about your commentary journey and what sort of piqued your interest to go, you know what, I'm going to give sports commentary a go.
I think, if we go way back, my dad was very much someone who was a devotee of radio with pictures. So if there was, and our family sport was cricket, or at least my dad's and mine was, put the cricket commentary on. I don't have the same reverence for the Channel 9 team of yore. Bill Laurie and Tony Gregor, there's no way I'd line up for their autographs, dead or alive. But we would always mute the TV commentary and stick the ABC on. And so the commentary voices that I grew up with were your Jim Maxwell's, Neville Olivers, and from England, I was a bit late for John Arliss, who's one of my heroes, but Brian Johnston from the BBC team was very much one of them. Then I was lucky enough to work in radio for a while, and I always shied away from commentary because of the way it took up weekends. And I had a young family. My kids were born when I was doing radio, and I thought, well, look, that'd be a nice thing to do, but I've seen sports commentary equals divorce, more or less. And then but then when I actually bit the bullet and decided to do it, I think like a lot of commentators, it's a very common story. I decided to become a commentator when I was an inpatient at a psychiatric hospital. Very common story. But no, we were looking at, my life had hit rock bottom, and one of the things we were learning about was, what's really us, what sorts of things are we doing when you're thriving, what's something you'd like to do where you can get into sort of that flow state where you have more energy at the end of it than you do at the beginning because you're just being you. And I thought, well, I've been avoiding sports commentary for a long time. What if it's the thing I'm really good at and I've never tried it? And going into it and actually doing it, I did a lot of prep before I joined the Quaffle W, the Aussie Rules comp for women here in Southeast Queensland. And the more I did it, the better I felt. And so I thought, okay, I've hit upon something here. I don't know whether I'm ever going to get to be professional or whether I'm just going to be a sort of a high-level amateur. You think of footy players around the country or any sport, there's a lot of people who never crack the big time, but you watch them play and you think, okay, I'm not worthy to be on the same field as you. So it's kind of, how good do you have to be to still suck? So I don't know whether I'm going to be able to crash through the barrier, but essentially I've had a go at commentary because it was something I'd always been interested in, and I stayed with it because it seemed to it seemed to be something that resonated with my soul, for want of a less airy fairy phrase. So that's I think that's me.
Was it something that sort of drew you to go, look, I want to do some play-by-play, or I want to do interviewing, I want to do presenting, I want to do special comments, and particularly with AFL? Was there something that sort of drew you to any particular part of commentary in any particular sport?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to be a play-by-play caller, even before I knew, and it's probably because I'm not an ex-player, and
Yeah.
every time I'd listen to it, I mean, the commentary teams that I loved have always been the combinations of you have your nerd who maybe wasn't so good at the sport, but just knows everything that ever happened anywhere, anytime, and then next to them is the grizzled old player who's been there, done that, knows what it's like, and if you have two ex-players, then they seem to talk in their own world and never bring in anyone from outside of it. If you have two commentators who haven't been there before, then they can tell you everything about the game, but they can't tell you what's in the game. Mm-hmm. And so the best teams I've found, and every now and then you hit the jackpot with someone like a Richie Benaud in cricket, who is both a trained journalist and a participant. Probably someone like Dennis Cometti as well, who was an ex-player and had his commentary chops as well. And so you every now and then you get someone who has the double jackpot. But for me, I thought, no, I'm someone who played sport well enough to enjoy it, but was never going to make the big time. But I was always the one that could tell you, what happened in the third test of the 1968-69 tour. And so I thought, let's go with that. And apart from that, I'm just a word nerd. I mean, the most famous thing I did when I was on radio was a poetry segment. Well, it was mainly a comedy segment, but it pretended to be a poetry segment. And so for me, just the love of the word, wanting to describe things in good ways, not wanting to become the show. Some commentators get so flowery that they forget that people actually want to know what the score is. Mm-hmm. But I've always loved people who played with words and who just lifted. With good commentary, you enjoy a game more. I've learned, and so I thought, well, what if I can be that guy?
My commentary journey is probably one filled with lack of confidence as a kid growing up. I was always one of those shy kids, horrible at making friends, or I was the guy that used to stand around on the fringe of the group and just be there. And for probably a better description of it, if I didn't say much, no one would notice. But for some reason, as a young kid, it was just commentary just got to me. I was the kid as a 9-year-old. I fell in love with AFL in country Victoria. I've echoed this story many times throughout my circles. I used to watch VFL on TV. This was in the 90s, so we're talking. I think the ABC call used to watch. I used to get on to watch Springvale and Williamstown play on Channel 2 a fair bit, and then I used to listen to 3AW, whatever game was going on a Saturday afternoon. And then I'd pick up my copy of the Herald Sun. I'd have my Friday paper, my Saturday paper, and my Monday paper. So Saturday afternoons, I used to just lay in front of the TV, have 3AW blowing really loud. 9-year-olds are out on their bikes and all that sort of stuff. But I guess growing up in regional Victoria, it was just too cold. And then I fell in love with wrestling. And a couple of mates and I, we did the old backyard wrestling. We ignored the signs. Do not try this at home. But a few of us did. And so for me, I actually grew up in front of a camera where we did commentary. We did our own play-by-play. We had to build characters. For me, I was more fascinated by the promo work, and I was so shy, absolutely horrendous at it. But it was just, I grew. The more I did it, it was like, okay, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about that, camera on now, and we're just going to drop it. And this is the kid that's very shy. So I threw myself into that, and I got better the older I got. But I've just been, probably like a lot of people who may be listening to this or watching this, I've just started watching the documentary Beckham. And there's a big reflection on the FIFA World Cup 1998. And I got the Nintendo 64 game, FIFA 98. And it just got me thinking as a kid when I got it, when I was 10, 11 years old when that came out, I used to spend hours in my room. I used to turn the volume down and I used to commentate. I didn't know who David Beckham was. I didn't know who any of these players were. But I used to just create a story while playing the game on the old Nintendo. And I was like, bang, I just did it without even thinking. And then I threw myself into debating at high school. Did the whole handful of notes on a piece of paper, bombed on my very first one. It was terrible, but I just threw myself in there. So when I got more into when there was an opportunity to do sports calling as a sort of a 20-year-old, the opportunities in my local radio station they were there. And I did radio shows, and I just gradually started to improve with ad-libbing. And so sport always drew me back to, this is what I'm going to do. And then I was lucky enough in 2009 for the Riddle District Football Netball League back in Victoria. There was an opportunity to do some trial games and sort of build a team where I ultimately, I know there's probably mates out there that are watching it. I was like, I'd put people in spots where they were calling, and I'm like, that's kind of what I wanted to do, but I wanted to create the vision first. And we had this historic occasion in 2009 where Highlands FM in regional Victoria teamed up with Energy 3NRG FM in Sunbury, and then Southern FM on the outskirts of Melbourne. And we had 3 radio stations broadcasting the Southern Footy League via the RDFNL Interleague. And we covered, I think we covered several hundred kilometres on community radio for this one big game. It was massive. But for me personally, it was like, I was more about how can we grow, how can we create? And I was lucky enough to go, hey, let's do this and bring the people along for the ride. So I did about 6 years of commentary for the RDFNL, built it from the ground up, worked with some wonderful people and had some wonderful memories. And that was very special for me. The first year that I did play-by-play was in 2011. I started going out with my now lovely wife, and I didn't really have the confidence anyway. I was like, what am I doing? And I threw myself into one game, and I'm like, okay. It was at Riddle v Diggers Rest. It was the grand final rematch of the previous year. Rematch of the grand final from the previous year. And I was off. I was like, okay, we're in. And then I got Jess involved in the next week, and the game ended at halftime, and due to an unfortunate injury to a player, it was like, okay, we're away now. And we were lucky enough to win a couple of national awards too after a couple of years, and then after my radio journey there, we moved to Victoria. I think when I was working as a journalist, I'd always got in trouble from the lovely employees.
Sorry, moved to Melbourne.
No. So I got told I prioritised radio broadcasts on the weekend over my other work commitments. So we had other leagues that we're involved in, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm calling down here this weekend, and it's a different league. So my lovely former editor, and I've thanked very recently, gave me the opportunity to go, you know what, you're good at this. You're managing the other areas, just go for it. So, and then when I landed up here in Queensland, I basically just said to AFL Queensland in 2019, I love community radio. Every time I go to a game, I want to I want to listen in. And they're like, well, we don't have community radio, but we do have a spot available in the QAFLW competition. And away we went. So I was lucky enough from there. Then I had a chat to Jason Bennett, and he encouraged me to get into VFL, and I started doing work at SEN, and I was able to get a few AFL games too. So the process started from very humble beginnings back in the day, but it was the only place where I kind of felt comfortable. And there was one game that I did. It was a under-18s game, second semi-final, and Rupert's Wood were playing Macedon at Tony Clark Reserve. And this, for me, was probably the biggest game of my career at that point. It was the biggest game, one of the probably top 3 memories that I remember now, even out of all the games that I've called, out of the hundreds I've called. But Macedon came back from all against the odds. There's this superstar called Seb Malatek who kicked 6 or 7 goals in the day. They beat Rupert's Wood, who hadn't lost a game out of, I think, 48-game win streak they had. And we were right on the balcony, surrounded by plenty of people, and the crowd were going absolutely bananas. They were thriving. They were eating away from our energy. They were just feeding into it. So that the more excited I got more excited, and they ramped it up. So it was just this remarkable energy of this once-in-a-lifetime call and once-in-a-lifetime game. The two faced off in the grand final. Rupert's would beat Macedon by 20 goals. So we knew that this was something special, and that gave me the appreciation of being there with the spectators and thriving off their energy, which you just can't encapsulate anywhere else. So that's sort of my journey to, from the days of, and of course I played 1,000 games of footy in the backyard, kicking it around. I had 2 teams, and I'd split my friends up into 2 different teams, and I'd had games going up, made up stats, and gave voices to my female friends who were interviewers.
But this is what we do. We create, like, the story of commentators or people who grow up to become commentators making these worlds in the backyard. I mean, with us, it happens to be sport. I mean, we're basically the sports version of the kids who read all the fantasy books and maybe play Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. They're creating a world which for them is perfect and safe. And I feel like we're doing the same thing in the backyard. Like I'd be out in the backyard, kicking whatever shaped ball or bowling whatever shaped ball. And there's something about
balloon.
That's it. That's I mean, for me, yeah, cricket, 4 codes of football. You see some hockey at the Olympics, so you go outside and get a cricket bat and a tennis ball, and that's hockey. But somehow adding your own commentary to it is what makes it important. And I think the sound of Australian backyards is kids playing in the backyard alone with someone else, but they are commentating the house down and the rest of the world becomes irrelevant. And even people who have no intention of commentary, that's what they do in the backyard. It's almost like adding your own commentary to it makes it matter. It's like this has gone from being me playing in the backyard to a matter of international importance where you can't quite believe there are not journalists there interviewing you after the game.
It's like the biggest thing since sliced bread, isn't it? And essentially that's probably where a lot of hear a lot of stories of famous or players are going to become well-known athletes. It's them kicking the ball around the backyard until it's dark, till they can't see, and they're making their own dialogue about what they're happening, whether it's mentally or verbally. It's a form of storytelling. I guess a form of storytelling. They tell themselves, "Oh, I might actually be good at this," and it helps them improve.
Yeah, it's no. This is a very common experience, and really, one day we need to get a commentator on one of our banknotes. So that's really the only logical conclusion to all of this.
Oh, I think didn't Richie Benno get on a $2 coin or something like that?
It had to be a $2 coin, didn't it? So, couldn't go on a $5 note, but anyway. So yeah.
So as you can see, throughout our storytelling, throughout our commentary passions, it is very much the art of storytelling that just keeps us coming back to the well. And I think the beauty about it's calling, interviewing, you're doing the tech stuff behind the scenes. You're there seeing something that hasn't been done before. It might have been replicated in different forms, but you're physically being there. You're seeing history rewritten right in front of you. And I think that's the most unique part of broadcasting in sport. Doesn't matter what it is.
I mean, I've got a formal music background, and so the number of people I've spoken to where I notice, first of all, we're improvising. There's an element of jazz in what we do in sports commentary, but also it's not just you riffing by yourself. In the same way that if you're doing a solo in a jazz combo, you have to listen to what your drummer's doing, you have to listen to what your bassist is doing, you have to be aware of what's around you, you have to be aware of the mood in the room. Even to say, okay, what do I want to communicate to these people who are right here in front of me? And we're doing that as well. I think one of the traps that I occasionally fall into with commentary is I kind of bring a story to the game instead of looking to see what the story coming from the game is. And so the more that I'm able to engage with the game and find out, okay, what's going on here, what can I say about what's happening in front of me right now, and then riff with it, they tend to be the ones that turn out the best. And then at a different level, the elements of commentary which relate to things that are like, I know a lot of singers who have been through a lot of training. The way we use our voices, I mean, obviously content is very important, and we can talk about that more later in the episode, but the way that we change our volume, the way that we change our pitch, the way that we change our speed, these are all things that singers have to do as well. And one thing I'm looking at just as a side project is things like, how do we make sure that we breathe correctly for the next segment? So when you see in Aussie Rules, when you see a clearance from the middle, and then you might look forward and you see 3 or 4 teammates lined up down the left, making sure that you take a breath at the beginning so you can sort of almost sing your way through the rest of the passage. So that's a little bit sort of, level 4, but that's just one of the things I think about about commentary, sort of finding things that I can learn from other spheres that link in with what we're doing.
I also find that having a background as an AFL umpire, I know there's not too many sports outside the AFL that do have that play-by-play commentary, but I've really felt what AFL umpiring resonates with me when you're umpiring with somebody else is that how long you have the play for before you pass it off, and essentially when you're in that AFL space and you're calling or you're umpiring, you've got to be you got to have your attention at 100 the whole way. So you have to pace yourself, and that's where you get the handover to your next call or your other umpire too. So then you can reset, look around, and then go again when the time comes.
Which comes back to jazz combos. I mean, we've all heard commentators who basically decide, okay, this is all about me here. I'm going to keep going for ages. I've heard saxophonists do the same thing in jazz clubs where they've forgotten there are other people on stage. They're just off. And so, yeah, knowing it's funny because you need a bit of ego to have the confidence to put a microphone on and call a sporting fixture, but you also need enough humility to realize, hang on, this is going to sound better for the people who need to hear commentary if I share with the other person, and realizing that you are kind of part of a combo in the box there.
And these are things we'll cover in future podcasts as well. But just to add one more point to that too is if you are the saxophone player, you're caught in the moment and you're oblivious to everything else that's around you. If you are calling and you're in the moment, you don't have the chance. I mean, you and I we've called games on our own where we're so caught up in this little box, whether big cricket or AFL or other sports, and so you don't have time to look outside the box because you're too busy trying not to drop the ball. So I found over the years, the more that I've done more co-calling in different sports, is it's been a lot easier where I can learn a lot more by not calling that I can feed into to my call. A couple of questions I'm going to throw you away. What do you remember about your first game, if you still remember it?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, my first game of Aussie Rules was 2021. So it was round one of the Quaffle W, Lation Park, Yeronga. And it was you and Jeff Newman, from whom I've learned very different things from each of you, but I've certainly learned a lot from both of you. And of course, there was a sponge. I was just turning up to watch and see how everything worked. And it's like, no, mate, you're on special comments. And thankfully, I had been, because I'm one of these people who needs to know everything. So I had notes on different people. I knew that at that stage, I wasn't particularly good at analysing a game of Aussie Rules. And so I thought, right, my role here is when there are little gaps in play, come in and tell stories about the people and flesh it out a bit. And I've since discovered, now I did that because it was all I had that time, but over the course of an Aussie Rules season, it's actually good. You give all the stories and bios earlier in the match. If you're still doing that on grand final day, it's like, no, we've heard all that for the past 3 months. Right now, we just want you to concentrate on the game. So it's not a bad way to shape the story anyway, but I did feel comfortable, partly because you and Jeff made me feel very comfortable, partly because I'd already had a lot of radio experience behind a microphone. But also there was a real element of, this is so cool. So it was good. The following week I did my first play-by-play, and it was a little scarier. And there were bits where I missed the play, kind of fell behind it, and then would pick it up for the goal. And so I thought, okay, that's something to work on, because when you do practice at home, you're usually calling off a TV, and the view you have is very different from when you're at the ground. And I thought, okay, it's round 2 of the season, long season in front. At that stage, I had I was prepared just to do a year of special comments so that I could find my chops, get used to it. Opportunities opened up, and I ended up doing play-by-play regularly by the end of that season. So it's always good if you can find a volunteer role in a league that people are about to leave, because that will open up opportunities for you. So I fluked that, but I've gone off a bit of a tangent there. But no, the first game, there was a little bit of don't stuff it up, but it was mainly this is so cool. How about yourself?
My first game was Woodend Heskett v Macedon over Tony Clark Reserve. I was a head trainer over at Woodend, but I was making that transition into doing some sort of calling, and I let the club know that this was probably the path that I was going to pursue after being...
Just stop there. For those of us who don't speak fluent country Victoria, where are we?
So we're Mount Macedon, so Memorial Cross, smack bang an hour north of Melbourne and an hour south of Bendigo. And when you're driving up north from Melbourne, it's the first lot of mountains that you see. It's one of the coldest places that I've ever experienced. So,
thank you. You may continue.
So I was doing first aid there. That was my way to get involved in senior football, and Jay and I, who's best man at our wedding, we went down to the ground earlier on in the week, met everyone there. But we met some of the key people there, and we got to learn about the club and a bit about the history, and so we just started planting the seeds. So I would I would finish, doing my being a trainer for probably, I think I left about half time of that particular game, and then went up and we did it all via the telephone line. So it was all people at the ground probably couldn't listen in because it was still that significant delay. But yeah, we had some good moments there, which was pretty good. So yeah, I haven't forgotten about that one. I've still got a photo of it sitting around somewhere. There's me in my my white footy shorts, which I wore as my trainer gear at the time. Had my Woodend Heskett Football Netball Club polo, and I had my Highlands FM hat. So something from my playing days, something from my club supporter days, and something from my radio days, all in the one hit there. So
something old, something new, something borrowed. Was any of it blue?
Navy blue. It was the polo, sort of dark navy
there we
blue.
Go.
So
right,
yeah, it
okay.
works. There, we're on the way there. What has been your most challenging moment as a caller? Like a particular game where you were like, "This is tough. Something's gone wrong," but you haven't forgotten it. And I think of
do you mean?
Well, so I often think of the worst moments end up being probably the best stories.
Yeah, it's, can be answered a few ways. I mean, one is where things have technically gone wrong. And thankfully, it's usually been something where, because I've gone into commentary in my 40s, I've thought, okay, there's not really much we can do about this. And either there's a tech person there who's just doing their thing and has enough stress already, or it's something that I get walked through. So those things are challenging. Secondly, I mean, I am someone who gets too hard on myself for mistakes that I've made, and there are, remember back to the mental hospital, there are reasons why I'm too hard on myself, but that's a totally different podcast. But I remember not the first game I called play-by-play, but after that I was back on special comments for a rep game, and I started talking about a player out on the ground who I thought was Macy Brown, who normally plays for Cooperoo but was playing for the Lions Academy that day. And I started talking about what she was doing out on the field. And then down below the commentary box, I heard, "No, I'm Macy Brown down here." And I looked down, and sure enough, she was telling the truth. After the game, she came up. Oh, that's right. She came on as a sub later and said, "Oh, the commentators worked out who I am yet." But after the game, I went down and met her, and yeah, she said, "Oh, sorry about that." I said, No, that was so funny. That was brilliant." We've gotten on well ever since. And the following week, I made another mistake involving Ash Williamson, who very quickly became one of my best friends in the competition. But when I made the mistake, I didn't realize I'd made it on air. It was when I was watching it at home later that night, and I was watching it sitting on the couch. My face, I assume I went white. I grabbed a pillow off the lounge and just buried my head in it. I felt absolutely ratty, and then basically I went up to her and confessed and said sorry, and yeah, that's worked out great. So yeah, I think the challenging days, certainly the ones where where I make mistakes, where I've misidentified someone on a big moment, they're the ones that I find hurt. And so often sometimes it's the challenge during the game, sometimes it's the challenge when you're replaying everything at night.
Oh, that makes perfect sense, and I think that's the perfectionist that comes in the space of being a caller, isn't it?
Look, it is, and probably in terms of a challenge that I felt I handled well. Preliminary final a couple of months ago in the Quaffle W, there was a major upset where the minor premiers, who were, in fact, they'd won the minor premiership with only one loss, and beaten in a big upset. I remember the crowd was just stunned at the end of it, and I was trying to be fair to the winning team by communicating their emotion, because they just made their first grand final as a club, and I was trying to be fair to them. And I was also trying to communicate just how stunned and upset. I mean, there were women crying in that match, and being aware of it. And I ended up listening back to it and I was really proud of it. But at the time, trying to make sure that I wasn't focusing too much on the losing team so the winners couldn't come back to me and say, well, it was our big day, and you spent the whole time talking about them. But similarly, not talking too much about the winning team so the losing team couldn't come back and go, yeah, great, we've just all been shattered, you've rubbed our noses in it. And so making sure they got equal airtime was tricky, and I'm sure I could have done it better, but yeah, that was the most difficult bit of commentary I've had to do, and I was happy with how it turned out.
But I think that's the art of storytelling, though, isn't it? Is that you're looking at it as a broadcaster, you're looking as a fan of the competition, and what's the biggest story? The team that's lost the preliminary final in shocking circumstances in one of the most one of the games of the year that no one would have ever predicted the result, or the team that's the Cinderella story of coming through to a grand final. And if you've had a team that is, regardless of what competition you're calling at, I had the pleasure of calling the QAFL Senior Men's Grand Final last year. Broadbeach played Aspley in Queensland, and I don't know whether the biggest story was Aspley winning the grand final after coming down from the VFL, or Broadbeach not having won a game all year, not having lost a game all year and then losing the big one. If I'm, putting on my journalist hat, I'm probably looking at the team that was expected to win and go, that's shocking. I don't think anyone would have predicted that result. Like if you're putting $1.01 on the team that's lost the fewest games all year and they get rolled later on in the final series, then that's the challenge that it comes as a broadcaster.
Well, I mean, the truth in both of those situations is there's more than one story. And I think if you think of it in terms of a newspaper back page, with the Aspley upset of Broadbeach last year, your main story on the back page is the winning team and the photo of them. But then the second story on the page is a fair chunk of it. Like it might be sort of, the bottom quarter to a third. Whereas had it been the other way around, where Broadbeach got their expected victory, then 95% of the back page is, Broadbeach complete undefeated season. And the remaining 5% is an ad for a dodgy tyre manufacturer. Yeah. And you put the story of the losing side on the inside page. So I think it's a case of saying, okay, there are two stories here, and the nature of it is that you need to give more space to the team that won because they won, but how much of the back page that second story takes up changes depending on the context.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the intriguing things about what we see in front of us when we're calling any form of sport. If we get the expected result, then I think it does take away a little bit from that as a caller in terms of how you tell that story, which is why I feel sometimes when I go into a game where if a team that's favoured to win gets rolled, I probably get up for that a little bit more, or it gets really, really close because you're seeing something quite special here, and I like the element of unpredictability when it comes to a game or a match. I've called squash before, I like to think that if the underdog gets up. That's probably reflective of me too. And when it comes to storytelling, because I probably feel that I've had people ahead of me throughout my career that have just been so talented and they've got through and they've done a few things. But I always have that sort of ingrained passion for the underdog, and I probably see myself as an underdog sometimes, of having to fight that little bit harder than some of the other people that I've had the pleasure of riding shotgun with. And that's an absolute no disrespect to anyone in the industry, and just even professionally in other areas. But I felt that I resonate more with the underdog, so I want to see the underdog fight.
I've read a lot of articles about why humans tend to go for the underdog. I mean, the fairy tales do not end with, and the giant got rid of that annoying little Jack and he was never seen. That's not how the fairy tales end. I think the hardest ones to sell are when the story gets repetitive. For example, this year in the Quaffle W Grand Final, the team that was expected to win did, but it was their first premiership. So there was a story there. Where it gets tricky is when a team wins their sixth premiership in a row. I think we've seen that in men's tennis in the last 20 years, where how do you sell the story of yet another Djokovic Grand Slam, another Federer Grand Slam? Nadal's won his 8th French Open. Let's all get what's down the pub? Exactly. I think when it's been repetitive, they're the hardest stories to generate, and what you end up looking for is things along the journey, maybe a little bit of adversity, or you go the other way and say, if they've just won 6-love, 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 you say, okay, this was perfection itself. So it can be a little bit tricky to find the stories, but yeah, as long as there's a human involved, there's usually a story there somewhere.
Welcome back to PlaybyPod. If you're a fan of these sorts of podcasts, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. My name's Chris Yeend, joined by Daniel Viles. Now, one of the key things we're going to sort of try and look at is a piece of commentary. Obviously, we can't share it, but describing a piece of commentary that we're a big fan of, that something we learned from. And going back and watching this piece of audio now, I've learned a lot from you because of that. And one of the key things, so this key piece is it's Bruce McAvaney's run, a call of the Cathy Freeman's run in the 2000 Olympics, where she ran through and won the 400 meters. As Cathy was crossing the finish line, he goes, "This is a famous victory, a magnificent performance. What a legend, what a champion." And then he let the moment breathe. Now, talk to us about what makes that a good piece of commentary for any sports broadcaster.
First of all, he didn't try to fight the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the silence at the end of the race. What was equally impressive was his silence at the beginning of the race. The clip you normally get has just the race there, but he would have been talking for a good 3 and 4 minutes before that as all the runners get introduced, and he had all the biographical information. But because the stadium was so noisy that night, and I know that because I was there, it is literally when Cathy went across the finish line, it is the loudest noise I've ever heard in my life.
So you were there?
Never heard it. Yeah. I was so I was on ground level, and I was level with the beginning of the 100-meter straight. So when the runners came round into the straight, Cathy had just taken the lead from Lorraine Graham and Catherine Merry. So I could see that she was going to win. Mm-hmm. I was also clinically depressed at the time, so I wasn't really feeling anything. It was just this kind of, what the on earth is going on here? So different story. But with that, so Bruce picks up the race as it comes in. It's not 100 meters, it's 400 meters. So his speed is very measured as they're coming around. He realizes that whereas with most races, you call it a bit more like a horse race where you talk about all 8 runners, with this one, the story was so Cathy-centric. And it took me a while to realize that wasn't just an Australian thing. People in Britain and America know about Cathy Freeman's race and what it meant at the Sydney Olympics. The whole world really was focused on this. And I think apart from direct relatives of Lorraine Graham and Catherine Merry and a few others, there was a real push for Cathy to win this. People around the world knew what it meant. And so Bruce had the luxury of being able to focus on that story and talk about where she was in relation to the other runners. The other impressive thing is at the end, and you just quoted the things he said because from the last 20 meters, it was clear that, okay, she's got the race won now. The time for analysis of the race would come. Mm-hmm. There was going to be a massive, lap of honor. She was going to be on the track for another 10 minutes after the race. I forget who the co-commentator was. It might have been Tamsin Lewis or someone like that. I can't quite remember. But they would have a lot of time at the end to talk about the minutiae of the race and when a runner made their move. But that last 20 meters she was crossing the line, that was for emotion. That was for big statements. This was a big moment that deserved big statements. I think 3 lines would have been enough. I think What a Magnificent Performance was a little bit weak in that, but this is a famous victory. And then just a couple of what a sentences.
Yep.
Absolutely perfectly got that. And Bruce McAvaney, I mean, he's not my absolute favorite commentator, but the thing I love most about him is that he never lost touch with that boy in the backyard inside him. He just always turned up with a how cool is this tone in his voice. He was even doing that at the Women's World Cup last year. He wasn't doing play-by-play commentary, but he was part of the presentation side, and he still had that how cool is this tone in his voice, and I love that about him.
I think with this piece of commentary too, and I love the analysis that you've given there, is that the silence that he's left at the end and he sort of spaced out and said very little. You were there in the crowd. You felt the experience of what it was like when Cathy crossed that finishing line and she won gold. The euphoria that you feel in the venue. And I think going back and watching this clip is that Bruce wanted to make you feel that you were there too, with the millions watching across the country. Is that, I imagine the tech production team, they would have ramped up the effects mic and just had the roar of the crowd. And you sitting there on TV, I mean, where were you when Cathy Freeman won that race? It's one of those things you simply don't forget, regardless of your age. I was 12 years old, and you don't forget that. But you're sitting there and you're like, I'm being overcome and overwhelmed by this special moment. But if you've got someone comes in over the top of that moment and just rattles off, I think that takes away from it. So whether you're on TV or whether you're in the stands, you're feeling the same thanks to Bruce's little piece of commentary there.
And as soon as a commentator says, what a lot of them say in that situation is, oh, listen to the crowd, or the crowd has gone off. The only thing stopping us from listening to the crowd is you.
Yes.
Shut up, and we will do the thing you just asked us to do.
And that's something you've sort of taught me over the journey, is letting the moments breathe. I've had journeys when I've been made aware of that. I've called with people who get caught up in the moment, as we all do, who come in over the top of that, and I think that sort of takes away from it a little bit. But having heard it now and heard how it shouldn't sound, and even with other calls in general, other people sort of come in other calls, now that I know that you just got to let those big moments breathe a little bit at the end, particularly even when it comes to radio calling, I think if you've got the effects mic up and the crowd is singing their bit, then you just let that moment ride. How long do you reckon? 5-10 seconds or something?
With that one, you can let it go longer. Now, most moments are not that big and that sustained. So the most recent clip I've watched, 10 seconds there, but I have a feeling he let it go for a bit longer. Maybe the next time he spoke might have been when Cathy slumps on the track and she does unzips and takes the hood off, and then there's something more to say, because then you see what her face looks like. And I think he was excused there for just saying the relief. It wasn't excitement, it wasn't triumph, it was thank God that's over. And apparently Ian Thorpe and Cathy Freeman have talked with each other, and they both said, yep, that was pretty much it. When we felt it was just like, oh, thank goodness, no one's going to ask me about this again. I've had to come from with my own calling, where most of us, apart from if you've got some seriously good connections, the first time we commentate is not in front of a crowd of 5,000, never mind 110,000. And so I had to come from the other way, where I'd sort of got in my mind, okay, don't over-commentate big moments. You've got to let them breathe. But when you're at a game where the number of spectators is 2 people and a dog, or at the very least where everyone watching the game has a direct relationship to everyone in the game, and quite often if you've got one effects mic in front of the comm box and the crowd's on the other side of the ground, then you have to make that moment bigger. And so that was one of the big things I learned in my first year, was that how you commentate a big moment in the context of the match depends on who else is in the orchestra. If you have no, instruments around you, then you've got to do all of the music. Whereas on that occasion, Bruce was surrounded by, a massed choir. And so he thought, well, this does not need a solo over the top. And so I'm still working out when there's, at the moment, we're doing AFLW games and the crowds are about 3,000. Now, that's significant. But with our equipment, we can't capture all of that. And I'm still trying to work out, okay, how do I balance that? So if the sound needs to be this big, how much of that's being provided by the crowd, and then how much do I need to add? And so that's something that I'm working on at the moment, trying to work out, okay, how big do I need to go to make this moment the right size?
How has the broadcast landscape changed over the past 5 years? And we're thinking the capacity of pre-COVID, what happened during COVID, and what has happened since COVID.
What's happening now is very similar to what's been happening in things like the music world, where it's easier to, once upon a time, it was really hard to get your foot in the door. Now it's much easier to get your foot in the door, but there's a million other people in the room. So with bands trying to make it big now, if you want to record and put something out there, it is easier than ever before. But trying to distinguish yourself from all the other people who have the same opportunity is more difficult. That's what's happening in sports commentary at the moment. There are a lot of opportunities for amateur callers to get in there and learn and call good level sport. But at this stage, we don't know how many of us will be able to make it to professional level, or how many jobs there are going to be. Was lucky enough to speak with one of the people I really look up to, Jason Bennett, a little while ago. He is not a Channel 7 employee. He's a freelancer. The only 2 commentators that Channel 7 employ for Aussie Rules seem to be Brian Taylor and James Brayshaw. So they're contracted, they're direct employees. Everyone else you hear is, okay, we want you for this long, sign here, we're away. When you listen to Aussie Rules on the ABC in Queensland, Quentin Hull and Zane Bojack, they're paid employees of the ABC. People like Michael Price, they're freelancers. They just come in when they're asked to. And so as a result, we've probably got more people doing sports commentary than ever before in Australia. And a lot of us have stars in our eyes, let's face it. We'd love to be able to do this instead of the crappy little desk jobs that we all get. But we're not getting a lot of direction at the moment. We don't really know how to turn the hobby into a career, and we also don't know how to get good enough to justify turning the hobby into a career. And so I think there's now, whereas once upon a time, as I said way back at the beginning of this, a lot of people were keeping their cards close to their chest and still are in terms of their commentary skills. I think because there's a lot of directionless people like us out there now, the time has come to say, okay, well, if you're a really good amateur footy player, you still have a coach. You still have access to people who come along and show you the ropes and tell you how to do things. There's a talent pathway often. So how do we? There's a vacuum there at the moment, and so at the moment we're filming a Zoom call to see if we can be part of the solution because I think there's an appetite there for it now. Who's going to coach us? Who's going to just help, regardless of whether we make it or not? Who's going to help us be better?
Yeah, and I think that comes back to what callers want to do as well. I mean, if I talk about from my experience, and I sort of refer to how has the broadcast landscape changed in the past 5 years, moving to Queensland from Victoria, it's given me an opportunity to call more AFL football and dabble in more sports. So since moving up in 2019, which was before COVID and after COVID, I've had more opportunities post-COVID to call a lot more levels of AFL. I've called national squash events. I've called national basketball events, national championships, seeing the future of the NBL on the courts up here, and I've called NBL 1. Those doors have really started to open now, and I've been very fortunate that with my involvement of being able to work as a freelancer with SEN to be a little bit more behind the scenes and work with some of the best callers in the country, I've been very fortunate enough, thanks to Joel Brooks, that I will, the work that he has done behind the scenes at SEN and gave me the opportunity to call 2 games of football. Ultimately, in the space of 2 years, I've called the premiers of one year and a grand finals of the other. So I'm pretty lucky about that. But I look at it where I am with my commentary space now and go, look, I know I'm at that certain level. So what can be done to sort of help boost that? Because that goes back to the one thing that I've spoken to a lot of streaming providers around the country or those involved in sports is they're getting asked the question of how come you're not streaming at this particular sporting event. So the way when we went into COVID, particularly up in Queensland, we only had a couple of months. Victoria, New South Wales, they had a lot of time, unfortunately, in lockdown. So their only main means of consuming sport was digitally. So now we're having more opportunities for more sport to be consumed digitally. So it's, as you say, it's opening up a lot more doors to be able to do all sorts of sports, multiple sports around the country at any given time.
The thing I'm finding tricky is helping, because most of the commentary is organised by the sporting bodies.
Correct.
So AFL Queensland organised the Aussie Rules commentary. Football Queensland organised the Premier League soccer commentary. Like the way I just squeezed in soccer and football there, just so I didn't exclude anyone. I'm very much a football man, but I thought someone's going to crucify me here if I don't specify. Anyway, and sometimes the people who do that, who organise that, it's either, who have we got? Yeah, you'll do. And you can get little blocks. I'm finding that with one sport at the moment where they're happy with the people they've got. And I listen to them and go, no, I think the players deserve better. Mm-hmm. And sometimes trying to convince the decision makers that, no, actually, this is what good commentary sounds like. You can do better. Stop giving it to the old crusty blokes. Yeah. So there's a bit of education there as well about what they can reasonably expect and ask for. And also just to provide a bit of incentive for people who really want to be good, mm-hmm. Who say, no, I love this competition. I want to help improve it. Let me in the com box so that I can be part of this and help raise this part of the competition to the level that they're providing out on the field.
That's very insightful there. I think that's you've hit the nail on the head about the changing landscape. Another comparison that I wanted. I don't believe this is the correct comparison. I don't believe in it at all. But a lot of people
You
have
just
said,
say it and I'll tear it to pieces. We'll
yeah,
be fine.
exactly. Okay, so a lot of people say that the AFLW in particular, and we're looking at that, is that they've chucked the full 18 teams in there, and the depth and the modelling at grassroots level from the bottom up hasn't quite matched. They've gone too hard too early. And I disagree with that. I believe what the AFLW has done is wonderful. As a sports fan, as an Essendon fan, I'm excited that I can have a team to get behind. But I think, when we revert back to the question, that the topic of today is how has the broadcast landscape changed in the past 5 years? I think it's changed too quickly to match the demands of it. I don't know that it's sort of like, okay, well, we've got some of the basic tools. Let's go out and stream something. But we talk about a financial model to make it sustainable going forward. You had the bare basics in mind. Now that we've got a lot more streaming services there, and I've had this conversation with different people across different sports around the country in terms of callers getting financially reimbursed for their time, and that's the reality. That's sometimes in this climate, if we want to, if we get an opportunity to earn money elsewhere instead of calling, then we're probably going to go and chase the dollar because the current circumstance that we're in. So I don't know. There hasn't been a lot of time to sort of sit down and build a solid financial model to go, okay, well, we're going to stream, where's the sport organisation? We're going to stream 5 matches, whether it be soccer or tennis, whatever it is. How are we going to sell this? Because virtually you've got a lot of screen time there. You've got this big screen, you've got this 16:9 format, people are watching on their phones, etc. You stick a couple of logos on there, you give the commentary team a bit of paper, you read out some, this is all thanks to blah, 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 blah. There's not that model that's been put in yet. And I think that in itself, with those sponsor mentions, can put money back into getting good equipment, but also keep callers going for longer. So that's where I think there's too many games. There's starting to become more callers, but if you had more money in the kitty to be able to pay for those callers, I think that's going to take time.
Probably 2 things there. Firstly is that the explosion in the number of games being streamed coincided with sporting organisations have to lay off staff members because when the pandemic came along, suddenly there was a lot less money around. And so, they were letting go of people they were already paying, never mind trying to get some money to people who were otherwise volunteers. So I think there was that element to it.
Of course.
The second one is that in order to put your hand out for money, you need to be generating money. Now, I'm not saying that as, I'm not coming across all right wing here. I'm not going anti-welfare. I'm talking specifically in terms of sports commentary. Yeah. But if you, you might bake some cakes and take them to the market and want to sell them. If they don't taste any good, then no one will buy them. You're not creating any money. So the fact that you've put a lot of time and effort into those cakes still doesn't mean you can sell them. And I think for a while there, the people who were commentating at sort of elite amateur level, for want of a better phrase, were just doing their best. They'd turn up with a team sheet and they'd say, "Oh, and the ball's gone back there, and that's Smith." I have no problem with those people coming along and volunteering because they're getting in there, they're having a go, they're filling a service, and they're certainly no better than the people who are running canteens or who are being first aid volunteers. And so sometimes I felt a bit guilty about commentators just putting their hand out for money simply because they turn up. Yep. What's starting to happen, and you and I have been part of this in AFL Queensland, and we are not unique in this regard, is that we've turned this, we are training as hard as the players. We are doing work during the week where we are finding out about players, we're calling in front of matches, and we've tried to bring it to a good standard. One thing, one of the assistant coaches in the competition said that when she asks her players to look at video footage of themselves, when there's commentary on there, twice as many of them do. And I thought, oh, that's something. If we're materially helping the clubs, then that justifies any claim we have to say, look, sporting body, we're actually providing something to you now, and something that sponsors might want to put their logo on instead of something where they go, Can you just turn the sound off, please?
Yeah.
That'd be handy if we're not associated with the dribble that's coming out here. So I think there is an element of commentators have to earn the right to go from complete unpaid volunteer to let's give you a bit of petrol and coke money.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and that's probably where you're looking at the quantity v quality aspect of it too. Another key element that I sort of want to mention, again, reverting back to how has the broadcast landscape changed over the past 5 years, are we seeing more people across different sports consuming more sport on their phones, on their laptops, on their TV, as opposed to physically going there? With particularly in the southern states, or New South Wales, Victoria, those that were in lockdown for greater periods of time, are they used to consuming a lot more of live local sport at home or the comfort of somewhere else as opposed to physically being there?
I think it's an and situation where they still want to go down to their footy club and hang out and see their mates and all the rest of it. But if they've got a niece or nephew who's moved into state to play, they're the games that they watch. There are people, of course, like every now and then someone will be at a game where we're commentating and they say, I was listening to you on my phone here. And of course, we're usually on delay a few seconds. And so what they're doing is they're kind of using us as a replay where if they've missed something, but they hear our voice go up, they'll be like, oh, hang on, what did I miss? And they'll go back and see it.
We talked about the development over the last 5 years across the COVID times for streaming in sports across the country. We have seen one of those companies go down in recent times, which is unfortunate down the circumstances of that. We hope everyone is managing quite well through that. But over the next 5 years, where do you see the landscape of sports streaming happening? And you speak about that upper echelon of those trying to get to that top level. And will we see more sports being covered across all different levels? And could we even get to a time where we will see more platforms cover more mainstream sports at the top level?
Look, it's an interesting question. And I think there's always going to be sports that need covering. There's always going to be people lining up to stick a pair of headphones on and a microphone and talk over them. But just as in the radio world, finding good presenters relatively easy. Finding good producers, finding good techies is difficult. And I mean, the example of Clutch has said to me that it's getting difficult to get the right business model for running a company like that.
But that goes back to what I was saying before too about how the demand for more streaming of sport has gone up, but the business model to sort of back that up. And I was using the example, okay, well, money for callers and stuff like that, but getting more sponsors on board and not knowing the ins and outs of that. But you're right, the business model wasn't as successful, and I see that could potentially be a problem.
It's. I mean, I don't have a business mind to begin with, so I'm not sure whether they overreached, tried to do too much. Well, that's the same thing, but I'm not quite sure what that happened. I mean, what I hope doesn't happen is that it all goes to the people who are already the big media players. And of course, there's one company at the moment which is owned by the biggest media player of them all. And they are behind a paywall, but organizations are saying, yes, you can do it because there's money in it for them without them having to put in much effort. So once elite amateur sport gets put behind a paywall, I think you've kind of missed the point of why you're doing this in the first place. So it's and I don't think that a lot of work has been done. And I mean, you've been singing this song for 3 years, where you need someone in an organization who can speak to the local businesses or speak to existing sponsors and say, hey, look, for this little bit extra, we can, pummel your name in commentary. And I'll just redo that bit so you can cut out the phone call in a moment. I think there's not been enough work done with going around to local businesses and, or existing sponsors and saying, look, you already sponsor this competition for, this little bit extra a month. We can make sure that we plug your name in commentary repeatedly. And I don't know whether that was one of the roles that went down with COVID, where people had to get rid of, sponsorship managers and things like that. But you're right, that seems to be the place. I mean, ultimately, because we're not actually making something that we can sell, we're just saying words, we end up being billboards for companies. The only way you avoid that is by going to the ABC, where it costs 8 cents a day for everyone to let you talk.
Yeah.
So actually, it's about 19.5 cents a day now. Totally different issue. So, but yeah, that role, it seems to be one that a lot of people seem to know how to do, but the sporting organizations have possibly thought, okay, for us to build up to where we were pre-COVID, that's down the pecking order a bit.
I think we're talking about money. There's one thing that costs money, and that's not just the people, because you can have people stream and do all that sort of stuff, but it's the equipment. And the one thing I've experienced across the radio and TV streaming platforms is the most important thing that you have, it's sound. And you need to invest money into equipment that produces good sound. Forget about the callers. Commentary is always the cherry topper. But if you've got a camera there and you've got an effects mic that can pick up the ambience of what's happening there, that people back home can feel it, what's going on, that's great. That's a good basis, but you still need money to go into that equipment, regardless of what you're doing. And once you get commentators on board, you still need good sound. And again, that comes at a cost.
Yeah. Thankfully, just getting that basic level can be a little bit easier to sell, because the same footage is then, and sound is then used for judiciary footage and can also be used for coaching purposes. So that's something that I think clubs can get on board with a lot more, and organizations can get on board with a lot more. And as you're right, as you say, the putting a bit of commentary on top of that. Obviously, it's better if you've got live commentators at the ground, but you can even have someone like I've often thought, purely because I like the sound of my own voice, and I know you do too, that you can call one game live a week, and then in an 8-team comp, there's 3 other games. That'd be, for me, a very pleasant way to spend Sunday, is just laying commentary over the other 3 games. So there's there are backups for that. Now, that's not a substitute for, I think when people go to studio commentary as a first resort, that's a problem. But to use it so that you can add a bit of icing onto the other games, that's easy.
Do you think that maybe, again, we're talking about this whole 5-year thing. We've spoken about the last 5 years, how it's evolved, and 5 years going forward. And I know people will be watching this. They'll have their own insights, which is wonderful, because we want to stimulate that sort of conversation. But maybe we see less money, or less streaming services, less main companies taking all the big sports, and therefore we essentially have everything on cable. We have KO, for argument's sake, that's picking up a lot more sports at different levels. So you might pay your small subscription, but a subscription like KO, which I know it's tied to a bigger organization, but if you have other companies rival that, and you have that little paywall, but it absorbs and produces a lot more sport, do you think that might dictate how we consume sport going forward, as opposed to relying on the big heavy hitters?
Yeah, it's what I've found interesting with a lot of these companies coming through is that what you're supposed to get, and what they're selling when they go to organizations, is that, sure, you might have someone who's been, who's done it as a hobby, and you've paid them, or they might have a small business, but we're a bigger organization, and so we provide reliability and a bit of extra professionalism. And if I'm honest, the companies that have been promising that and then producing it have not been providing that. Often they're scrambling for people to do the work for them, to do the camera work, to do the tech work. Some of them are students. You often find a diamond in the rough. In fact, I think some of those people will go on to big careers. But to do the volume of sports and the volume of games that they've been trying to do, they have not provided better quality than a lot of the people who used to do it either as a side gig, or maybe they were people who did camera work during the week and the sports was a bit of a hustle on the side. And so I would like to see companies in that area, I'm determined not to say in that space because I hate that phrase, come along and maybe just think a little bit smaller to start with, and say, okay, we're going to do one sport really well, or let's be slightly ambitious, 3 sports really well. We're going to establish ourselves there. We're going to make sure that our people are really good quality. And then from there, it's like, oh, okay, we got more people wanting to join there of good quality as well. Now we'll do a fourth sport. Now we'll do a fifth sport. And so, yeah, the overreach and the over ambition has been a problem. So in terms of number of sports cast, I think with things like the collapse of Clutch, it may reopen the door for some of these sort of hobbyists to come back in and say, okay, I'll do your comp and I'll do it well and I'll do it properly. And yeah, I think the issue of whether the big players start to dominate the community sport broadcasting sector will depend a bit on whether they want it and whether they see market value in it. And I'm not business savvy enough to know how they view that at the moment.
I think we just need more people to not only go to their local sport, but also to consume it when they're not there, consume other sports. I think we see two major problems at the moment. The supply and demand simply isn't on the same page. So the demand of sport doesn't match the supply of talent coming through. And to another point that you made earlier is we're seeing a lot of freelance work. So in an economy where people are looking for full-time work, to simply freelance themselves out and have casual work, to do sports, which is mainly based on the weekend, I think that's going to become an issue as well. Unless a company can sit down and go, okay, well, we're going to do this sport really well, and we're going to employ a whole heap of people, and we're going to make sure that we do everything properly. Maybe expand on their skill set for those who do the camera work. Okay, we're going to get you to do some video editing during the week, play some highlights, do some social media, feed that out to other, to their respective leagues, and diversify their skill sets. Anything by any means to get them on the full-time payroll, because I just don't know that if you're not committed 100%, I think the product is going to suffer because of it.
Play-by-play callers generally, we tend to be obsessive. Mm-hmm. We want to know everything about everything. We want to do a really good job. We want to make sure that everyone knows everything about everything. Yeah. And it's like, hey, you want to know that story? And so it tends to be people who immerse themselves in it. In some competitions, you have people who are like that and who attach themselves to a competition and just want to do everything at as high a level as they can for that comp. With some other comps, what they do is they say, oh, we would like to have live streams of every game with commentary. Who are we going to get to commentate? And then you have someone who does it, and they might be good, they might be bad, but they tend to be just sort of doing it. They're not trying to, they're not passionate about it. It's not an expression of who they are and what they want to be. And at the risk of oversimplifying, they're the ones that tend to fall down because the organization thought, oh, we want this, and then someone's filled the gap, rather than, oh, hang on, we've got some people here who are passionate about it, and if we give them this opportunity, they're going to really run with it and make it work. And so I do wonder whether some organizations have wanted commentary, they've wanted live streaming and broadcast and all the rest of it, but they haven't actually had the people who are passionate about it to keep doing it and to keep doing it well. I should say as well, I mean, you quite rightly talk about supply and demand. This is what has happened with every single business and every single activity where people are trying to make money from it since the dawn of time. This is not a new economic story.
Yeah, exactly.
If you think about when the internet first came out, everyone's like, oh, gotta have a website. Everyone got a website. The web soon became a graveyard for websites that people lost interest in after 2 months. You could just see them everywhere. I think there's a bit of that sorting process happening now with a lot of community level sports broadcasting, where a lot of people are having a go at it. And some organizations, it will stay and become a feature and become a constant part of who they are as an organization. And with others, it'll be, oh, that didn't work.
My final word on that one is we're looking at the bright side for those who are interested in getting a sports commentary and looking to try and open doors. The market is simply there for it. I think the only thing that comes down to an issue is, for every camera that's out there at a swim meet, with water polo or tennis or soccer or anything like that, is have they got a headset? And the headsets, they come at a cost. But if you've got a headset that plugs into the camera, you don't necessarily need a mixer. You're off to the races. So there are opportunities there to call a wide range of sports for anyone that wants to throw their hat in the ring, which is very, very positive for broadcasters or aspiring broadcasters around the country to get experience.
And I think that's the thing, is that if for anyone around the world, really, but let's talk about Australia at the moment, if commentary is inside you, where if you're watching a sporting fixture and you get frustrated at the commentary and think, I could do a better job than that, there's a very good chance you can. And if your passion is Aussie rules, go to an Aussie Rules organisation and say, look, I would like to commentate. What have you got? If they don't have anything, go to the next one. If your passion is water polo, go to your state water polo league and say, I would like to be involved in commentary. What do I have to do? Do you want me to do a show reel? Do you want me to just turn up and work with the guy? There will be an opportunity somewhere. So if you're just thinking, oh, these people need it, I might have a go. Well, maybe you will. Maybe, have a go. Maybe you'll find a hidden talent. But generally speaking, you already know if you want to be a commentator. You already know if you're the kind of person who almost can't stop yourself from commentating, and people are telling you to shut up at sporting events, just watch the game, you noisy moron. Then yeah, this is go find somewhere and put that passion to use, because you will improve, you will feel better, and you will find that people are grateful for your efforts, even while you're still learning your craft.
And what you said kind of applies to how I got to where I've been lucky enough to get, is that I purely asked the question of AFL Queensland, have you got any radio stations that do it? I want to listen. No, we've got a spot available to call. I know you mentioned you're calling. And then I would, if I didn't express the interest of I just want to listen in, I wouldn't have been able to call AFL football here in Queensland. That's the reality. Within 3 years of me calling my first QAFLW game, or making that phone call to the wonderful Joe over at AFL Queensland, I wouldn't have got the AFL gig. So it's just an expression of interest of I'm a fan of the sport. How can I consume it?
Yeah. So most doors want someone to knock on them.
Exactly. If you are a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. We want to try and grow this. We've got lots of complex issues, complex educational tools, and I say educational loosely. It's more of a conversational forum about commentary. There's probably 20 to 30 topics that we could cover for hours on end per one. It's all about telling stories as well. I want to bring new people on to discuss their commentary journey, whether it's calling the local chess competition. If there was commentators out there, I'm pretty sure somebody would have done it, or water polo, or whatever it is. We want to open the door. Daniel, thanks so much for jumping on board for the very first edition of PlaybyPod, and looking forward to seeing your career progress in extraordinary ways.
Look, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for giving me yet another avenue to talk, and back at you with your career progression, Chris. Onward and upward.